Methodist Episcopal Church. Dr. Crutchfield wears many hats. In fact, I don't know how he does all that he does, but all that he does well. In addition to serving as the General Secretary for the Department of Christian Education, he also is a full professor at the Memphis Theological Seminary in Memphis, Tennessee, where he holds the post in Christian education and is actively involved with the Methodist Studies House. And if that was not enough, he is also the pastor of Mother Liberty CME Church in Jackson, Tennessee. And those who know the history of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church will know that that is the mother congregation of that denomination. So he holds that distinction as well. He's a proud father, a proud grandfather, and recently a husband as well. And so we congratulate him on his recent nuptials as well. So without further ado, I present to you the Reverend Dr. Carmichael Crutchfield, our guest, and we're happy to have him today because he will be talking to us about his upcoming book, which is scheduled to be released widely at the beginning of next month. The title of the book is The Formation of a People, Christian Education and the African American Church. Dr. Crutchfield, welcome to CED Talks. And we're going to jump right in. Maybe could you just tell us a little bit about your vocational journey as a Christian educator? And then maybe from there, share a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Pierce. Definitely, I'm grateful and honored to be a part of this conversation today with my colleague and my friend and my brother as we talk today. Well, as I think about a vocational journey as a Christian educator, it really starts way back when, and as I have learned through theological studies about inner and outward call, I believe that this journey began for me way back when I was a Sunday school student in a little church in Northwest Tennessee called Bars Chapel, Christian Methodist Episcopal Church in Como, Tennessee, where my father was the adult Sunday school teacher all of the time that I could remember. And Sunday school became a vital part of my life. And I used to, and oftentimes I jokingly say this, but very much was truth until I came to seminary, that all I know about the Bible I learned in Sunday school. It started with that. It continued this journey, vocational journey, continued through young adult life. After I finished college and moved to Arkansas, a person named Mrs. Betty Moore was the director of Christian education of the South Arkansas Annual Conference. And she got myself and then my wife involved in Christian education, and the journey began. And then I was fortunate enough while in seminary and then a little bit after seminary to work for my predecessor, who was later elected bishop and the deceased now Bishop Ronald M. Cunningham, who I consider as my mentor. And finally, this vocational journey moved forward to me being elected General Secretary of Christian Education. But that was only after I had attended seminary and gained a couple of degrees and learned and gained appreciation for Christian education in a deeper way. And what inspired me to write this book? Two or three things. One, my good colleague and friend, Dr. Denise Jansen, and I gave a proposal to Judson Press, writing a book on formation of youth adolescent African American youth. And Judson, well, we have a contract for that, but they wanted me and to know if I was interested in writing a book about Christian education in the African American church. I had given consideration to it before, but this sort of pushed me forward with that, and was glad to do it. And then lastly, what inspired me was I teach every semester a course that I use Dr. Ann Wimberly's book, Soul Stories, which connects our story with God's story. And all of those things have inspired me to write this book. And so here we are with it.
So it sounds like it's been a long and a very fruitful journey, and you have been a lifelong learner. I jokingly call you Dr. Carmichael Crutchfield, in as much as you have a D-Min and a PhD. So that's exciting to hear about your journey, both as a educator, but also the journey that has led you to be an author as well. Now, you make mention in your book, you talk about the fact that Christian education has existed in the African American church, but you say it is often viewed from a very narrow perspective. What do you mean by this?
Well, what I mean by this is that sometimes we compartmentalize Christian education in the church, where my experience has been as a pastor and a person involved now on a connectional level, and in ecumenical circles, of course, as well. It has been that we oftentimes compartmentalize it in saying that we have a Christian education department, a Christian education board, Christian education committee, and it sometimes gets narrowed down to those few people who have been designated as the Christian educators in the church, so to speak. And so we oftentimes don't see Christian education in a broader aspect, that it is contained and part of what we do in all of the life of the church. It is what, in our case, what steward boards do, what stewardesses do, what ushers do, what music ministry, all of that is a part of the educational ministry of the church. But oftentimes people see it only limited to those people who are involved in it. And so people will even say, I'm not a Christian educator. Therefore, sometimes we see fewer numbers in Sunday church school because people don't consider themselves as people who need education or to be part of education. And so they are not part of it. So we narrow it into this narrow way of thinking.
I think you're absolutely right. And I would assume that is part of the reason why you use the term formation. You talk about formation even in the title of your book. What is the role of formation in the educational process within the church as you see it?
Well, it is that lifelong process. When you asked me earlier about my vocational journey, it really is not just that's my vocational journey. But when I think about my Christian journey, I think about it as being formed over time in a long process, and that it was not just a classroom, one classroom after another, graduating from one place to another place to another place, but it was all of this effort was made. Even and in the book I speak to and talk to about worship as formation, and how the songs, how the prayers, how we are formed as Christians through all of these things through our lifetime, and that it's no accident that in our local churches and in our denominations, we have so designed it where there is something educational offered for every age level in the church, as we refer to it, as cradle to grave. And so children, I know I oftentimes, when I have baptized infants and talk to parents, one of the things I really try to emphasize to them is that the journey is now beginning with this baptism, because you've made a decision that you're going to bring this child up in the ways of Christ, and that this will mean that this child will be a part of what is all that's offered by the church. And then it becomes a tragedy, and tragedy really, when the local church doesn't provide for every age group in the church, because every age group needs to be formed, and not only in the educational part of it, but also in worship, as I said earlier in the book. And I'm teaching a series now on spiritual formation and hymns, and how the hymns have formed people, and I know how the hymns have formed me as a Christian. So that's what I mean by formation.
Very, very interesting. And certainly as Methodists, we're often known as a singing people, and how those hymns have formed us and formed our faith. That must be a fascinating class. You also talk a lot about discipleship as it relates to Christian education. And I wonder if you could say more about that, because I know sometimes, again, when it comes to the departmentalization, some would say discipleship has more to do with evangelism and church growth. But you advocate, and I think articulate quite well, how discipleship is a part of the work of Christian education. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that to help our audience understand it.
Okay, I will certainly do that. And as sort of as a prelude to that, several years ago in the church when I was a young adult, one of our bishops, I think he was a senior bishop at the time, proposed this plan that was called 2020. And what he envisioned in that plan, by the year 2020, the year that we're in now, that the entire church would be disciple. And what he meant by that, and then after that, a plan was laid out by the CME Church called Discipleship 2000, which was in that time to say by the year 2000, and this was in the 90s, that we would have this plan that we would be working towards 2020, where everyone would be disciple. Well, all of that, as we know, as Methodists, sometimes comes and goes based on who's in leadership. Well, discipleship for me, it was in that journey in the 90s that I began to see and started reading, and then even did my D-Min around the idea of discipleship. And the idea for me is simply this, and it's from the Wesleyan understanding of discipleship, is really about following Jesus. And that's all caught up in loving God and loving your neighbor, and learning what that means to the greatest depth of learning about what it means to really follow Jesus. So the learning aspect, the discipleship, and why education is a part, is that you can't, and I contend that you can't become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that's why he says, make disciples. You can't become a disciple of Jesus Christ without learning. And that's part of the making process that's taking place. And so all of the educational process is in trying to push and help us to become more and more like Jesus, and become more and more into the image of Jesus Christ. And that's where formation takes, being formed in his image, but our walking in his image, learning from him, following him, and what it means when we read the biblical account in Matthew 5-7, reportedly the sermon, what we call the Sermon on the Mount. What is Jesus teaching us in that Sermon on the Mount? What is he teaching us about? What does it mean? And then when he talks about the kingdom of God, what does the kingdom of God really look like? What does that mean? What is that? And I contend that all of the Bible is helping us to see exactly what Jesus is talking about. He's not just talking about what he's teaching, but he's teaching about the entire Bible and all of the Hebrew as well as the New Testament, about what it is to be people of justice, people of peace, people of love, people who follow Jesus and exemplify and live out, and not just, the words, but to live out what it is to be a disciple and a follower of Jesus Christ. So discipleship, and I did a piece and for the Department of Christian Education called "It's All About Discipleship." And for me, that's what really it's all about, whether it's in worship, whether it's stewardship, or whatever it is, it has to do with discipleship.
So discipleship is tied in with this lifelong learning. It's holistic, and I guess even with the word disciple, a disciple always has a teacher.
Yes.
So that's the link there for us, and certainly for some of our viewers who have a relationship with ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center. I'm often met with the definition of Jonathan Jackson, that beloved professor, that Christian education is that ministry which undergirds all other ministries of the church. So I think that kind of gets at this holistic understanding of discipleship. And I think you've touched on it, but perhaps you want to say a little bit more, because Christian education often is equated with Sunday church school. Right. And certainly Sunday church school historically has been a critical part of instrument for the teaching of the faith to countless children and adults and everything in between. But I wonder if you have some thoughts concerning that whole notion about equating Christian education with Sunday church school.
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting as you ask that question, and one of the chapters in the book speaks to Sunday church school, because I don't think you can really have Christian education without taking seriously Sunday church school. There are some people today who think that it's not important, but it's teaching, and I think and now you being Reverend Pierce, now the chair of the Committee on Uniform Series for the National Council of Churches and the International Lesson Series, it makes me, and it leads me to say some more about that. But let me answer this question about that. It's more than that. It's good. It's excellent. As a matter of fact, we must have it, and I don't want to ever downplay it. But it's much more than that. When in my classes at the seminary, my intro class, I always ask people, what is their definition of Christian education? And invariably, more than 50% of the class will answer it with Sunday church school, because that's what really people have seen it to be. But it's much, much more than that, because what you said earlier about Professor Jackson, and I quote him often too in class, is that if we just limit it to Sunday school, then all the other ministries, all of the other things going on in the church don't have an educational base. They're just things and functions that we do. And so it's absolutely important to understand that church school, Sunday church school, is important to the local church, as important as it is to the local church. it is not all of what Christian education is about. Christian education, as I often say and have been informed over the years, this teaching business takes place all over the place, and that if we limit it to Sunday church school, then we're not going to be good leaders of people in the other arenas of the church. We're not going to be mentors. We're not going to be those who are leading the church as lay people in other places in the church, because we'll see it as just a function and not see as necessary as part of the Christian education journey. And that all of life, all of the life teaches us something. And the world, as John Wesley said, that the world is his parish, I see the world as one large classroom, and that every place is a place for learning, a place for teaching, and that it cannot and should not ever be limited to Sunday church school, because what happens absolutely with that, we'll limit it to those people who show up for Sunday church school, and that means that we're not part of Christian education.
I like that. So from John Wesley's the world as his parish to Carmichael Crutchfield, the world as his classroom. I like that, and I think you're spot on. Let me just pause for a brief moment to acknowledge those persons who have signed on and who are participating in this live broadcast. I see we have persons from Colorado and Missouri and Virginia and South Carolina and South Africa. And so we certainly welcome all of you here, and we appreciate the comments that you are sharing, your amens to the fact that every age level needs to be formed, and therefore we have to have age-appropriate curriculum and resources to aid in that formation, and that our primary task is about discipleship and making disciples. So thank you for those comments, and keep those comments coming as we continue this particular conversation. So, Dr. Crutchfield, what's the future of Christian education? Where do you see Christian education going? You are a pastor that is a teaching pastor. You are a professor in a seminary, helping to form and instruct persons entering ministry, entering pastoral ministry. Some of them will be entering teaching ministry and other ministries. And then you are a denominational department head. And so you see Christian education and formation with a more global perspective within the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, not to mention your leadership in ecumenical initiatives related to Christian education. So you have quite an expansive vantage point by which to look at Christian education. So, you know, I know you don't have a crystal ball and you don't necessarily call yourself a prophet, but what do you see as the future of Christian education?
Well, I see it in two or three things in the future, and some of that is playing itself out even today. First of all, back in the 90s, I believe, I used his book from time to time in classes, and I think it was written in the 90s. Chuck Foster wrote this book about educating congregations. And one of the things that he, and as a matter of fact, I did not use him. I used a couple of other people to sort of support this in a question as I reflect back upon the PhD work. One of the things I see it as community building. And where I see that community building being, and really very much Wesleyan, that and I have tried to give forth a hint of this in a work that I did at the Department of Christian Education, 21st Century Discipleship, where talking about small groups and how small groups and taken from David Watson, moving from to covenant discipleship groups, playing off the class leader system, re-looking at, revisioning what class leaders and class leader system might be, into a sense of a spiritual formation type small groups, where I see this taking place in Sunday church schools. I see Sunday church schools where curriculum will be varied, where some will be using the International Lesson Series that comes from the denominational houses. But I also see that denominational houses and others, publishers providing in whatever ways, whatever electronic these days, probably ways that help people in spiritual formation, and what that really means in the life of people and this lifelong learning process and being formed in Jesus Christ. I see that as one of the ways that takes place. Along that line, that's where I see discipleship being emphasized and continue to be emphasized more and more. Spiritual formation of people, faith formation of people. And so in 2018, I was able to convince the General Conference to change our department to add formation to our name, because I do see that that being a major emphasis as what it is to be in the education business, and how we continue to define and make sense out of what it means to form people in the image of Christ. I see more emphasis being put on that. A fourth thing that I don't think I mentioned it in the book, but it's certainly something that I talk about a lot around seminary, is that I see the future of Christian education, more and more people who are lay people, going to seminary and not necessarily getting Master of Divinity degrees, but getting Master of Arts in Christian education, or something of that nature, a degree that requires lesser hours, but more concentration in the area of Christian education. For I also see, and along that line, I see in the future that we in the African American church will see ourselves, including in our budgets, monies for people who act as directors of who carry out the role of directors of Christian education, the church, because it will be more focused, more concerned about the lives, more youth ministers, youth pastors dedicated to that role in the local church as we continue to struggle in our communities with our youth. I think we'll finally wake up and understand that if we don't give more attention and put more money toward it, it really probably never will change. But I see that happening. I see that in the future as a part of what might happen in the future. And then in my book, I do speak about as the future a critical pedagogy, a time where we give more attention and less attention to memorizations, maybe of scripture, although that's nothing bad about memorization of scripture, but more time given to and helping our young people, especially, to name problems, to reflect upon those problems, and then to take action with those problems, and become involved more and more in areas of social justice, areas where we need more and more people on the front lines and even on the back lines of making things I think we will live out. And so part of the book talks about that part of being a Christian educator is helping people to move to a place of seeing what God sees and thinking like God sees, and about justice. And I'm reminded of a sermon I preached a few weeks ago from the lectionary, is that Jesus tells Peter to get behind me, and because he's thinking like human beings, and God is keep challenging us to think more like God. And that's why I say being formed in the image of God. So those are some of the things that I sort of see the future of Christian education being in my eyes.
Thank you for that. So it seems like the future of Christian education is bright. So that's something to say hallelujah to, something to give thanks for. And I can see some of the comments that are coming in, and there are a lot of amens and hallelujahs to your view of the future in Christian education. And I'm happy to report that the future is now, because I see some of those things developing and manifesting themselves even now. As I looked at some of the persons who are participating and viewing this broadcast, some of them are theologically trained lay persons who are doing ministry in Christian education. I saw Sister Robin Porter Smith, who is our chair of the Fellowship of Church Educators and also the co-director for the Second Episcopal District in the AME Church, theologically trained layperson. And you talked about paid positions of ministry in Christian education. And I saw our own Reverend Samuel Green Jr., the Episcopal District Christian Education Director for the 7th Episcopal District, one of the few Episcopal districts that has a paid full-time Christian ed director at the Episcopal District level. I saw our Episcopal District Christian ed director from the 19th Episcopal District in Southern Africa, and so many others who are already living out this future in Christian education that you described. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. You have laid out beautifully what I would say kind of the theological and theoretical foundations around Christian education and faith formation in the African American, and I would say the African diasporic church as well. Now, but I also know that there are some persons watching this and some people who will watch this who are particularly interested about where the rubber meets the road per se, and they're looking for practical application and practical implementation of some of the things we're talking about. You know, we've talked about Sunday church school and Bible study and age-specific Christian education and formation. Certainly within the AME Church Department of Christian Education, we see all of this. It's a wide variety of ministries which fall structurally under the Department of Christian Education. Those that I've named, but also scouting and rites of passage, music and Christian arts, writing ministry, curriculum development, even men's ministry. So how would you say that your forthcoming book speaks practically to these and other ministries of Christian education?
I think that it speaks to the fact that and something, you know, people say nothing's new under the sun. It's just, I think, emphasizing and affirming and confirming some of the work that people are doing now. It also gives people something to put in their toolbox, but that might emphasize and give teaching. There is, I think that the bottom line, the most practical thing that we can do in Christian education is to be teachers, and the best teachers that we can be. And part of that I will say that the practical piece for me is that we must give tremendous attention to the idea and the ideas of critical pedagogy, where we are emphasizing to our people the need for us to be people who have action, and that our lessons, and in every lesson that's taught, and this is probably where the practical part comes, whether it's church school, whether it's vacation Bible school, whether it's a class being taught to the choir or whoever, the action when people leave that classroom or leave that opportunity for learning, what action are they taking as a response of that, as in response to that? How has this lesson caused me to be better at what God has called me to do, and not only be better at it, but to be actively doing something about it and going forth. I think that the book also emphasizes the need, before we can do, we have to be, and that we have to spend time ourselves with God so that we can be who God wants us to be. And that one of the things in our teaching ministry, and the practical thing is, a part of the practical things is that, and that's when I mentioned small groups earlier, and small discipleship groups and whatever, helping people to be formed in the image of Jesus Christ, and using the curriculum that's available to us, and giving more emphasis to using those curriculums that are like us, like what we are about and who we are about, and what has formed people like us, and helping that hopefully will help us to be. And as we are to be, and then we're able to do, and then we'll be able to tell others. And in doing that, we then are making more and more disciples. So I believe it's very practical in all aspects of ministry under the umbrella of Christian education, but it all lies under the idea of teaching.
Like that. And a lot of our viewers are liking what you're saying too. So I can imagine there are going to be a lot of people running out to buy your book the first of next month. And just in case you think you're only talking to AMEs, let me let you know that there's some CMEs who are watching and responding. Sister Pansy Washington is offering her thanks to you for this discussion on formation and discipleship, and there are others as well. I want you to put on, you have so many hats. You can keep them all on, but I want you to put the pastor hat on top of all the professor hat and the denominational leader hat for just a second. When you think about your role as pastor and all that encompasses doing local ministry in a particular context, if you hand to a fellow pastor your book, or a Christian educator in a local congregation, if you give him or her your book, what suggestions would you offer to them as to how to use your book?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think I would, in the back, in most chapters, I believe, I have some reflection questions at the end of the chapter. So I would say to pastors to use this book as an opportunity for people to read together, and as they read together in small groups, preferably. But if it's a larger group, that's okay too. But give much attention to the reflection questions, and use the reflection questions as a springboard for discussion in the local church, about your particular situation as it relates to that chapter, relates to that question, and how that speaks to your particular church. I would say that. And I think in doing that, that's what I'm going to do at my local church with it. That's how I'm going to use it. I'm going to ask people to read it together, and sort of, you may want to call it a book club. I do believe in people reading books together and discussing them and reflecting upon them, and that's why I try to prepare those reflection questions. Not anything very deep, just some real quick questions that sort of maybe gets people thinking and reflecting upon what has been said. And I think three things hopefully will happen as a response of that to that. What I think that when you ask, I thought you were going to ask me another question about pastors, something I learned in my MDiv classes, and I've tried to practice it as a pastor, and seeing the role of the pastor is to do three things: equip people, enable people, and empower people. And I believe that's what this book would do if people did it as I outlined earlier.
I like the idea of a book club or a book discussion group coming together to use these reflection questions. And I can certainly imagine that just about any ministry team or auxiliary or local ministry could come together and look at its mission, and then read these chapters and reflect on these reflection questions. I could see how that could be quite enriching for just about any ministry within the church. And who knows, we may move once everyone gets your book, we may move to a Zoom platform and create some virtual book discussion groups to reflect on these questions. That sounds like an exciting possibility. So I imagine you have spent quite a bit of time thinking about these things and writing these chapters and perfectly crafting sentences and paragraphs. And I know you are often, you're very humble, but I can imagine when you got the book, it's printed, Judson has sent you your copy of the book, and you opened it and you started skimming and reading. I suspect there might have been a couple of things that surprised you, that you might have even forgotten that you wrote, or maybe you read something and you were like, huh, I wrote that? That's pretty good. There's probably a lot of those in the book, but I'm wondering if something jumps out at you, and maybe if you could, you might read that sentence or that paragraph to us.
Yes, I'll be glad to. Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Reverend Pierce. I certainly that is definitely the case. And actually, I read the foreword first from Dr. Wimberly, who I admire and respect greatly. And I was very moved by what she had written. But then later, I just started, as you said, sort of flipping through the book. And this is what a paragraph that I on page 37. And in the middle of that page, I write, so what does this all mean for Christian education in the African American church? Socialization is still needed. However, the way it is delivered has to be intentional and certainly different than how it was delivered decades before. When I became a busy pastor and seminary student and felt I was losing touch with my children as they grew older, I adapted my routine and began to take them to breakfast on Sunday morning prior to Sunday church school. I simply wanted to know how they were doing. I like to think it was a good thing, but that is not my point. My point is that Christian education in the African American church has to be different than it once was, and it has to be intentional. Then intentionality involves three main foci: curriculum, goals, and accountability. It really is a question of what we will study and what we want to happen after the study. This isn't anything new, but it might be new in many ways for some in the African American churches. I contend that one of the African American church's challenges as regard to Christian education is that the church will have to require certain preparation and guidance that leads to more paid Christian educators. It is next to impossible to assess and evaluate without goals. For each lesson we teach, we have learning goals, but what are the Christian education goals for the church? Where is the intentionality and accountability? That's the end of that reading.
Intentionality and accountability.
Yes.
And something about that is very biblical.
Yes.
I think Jesus was very intentional in his teaching, and he certainly held the disciples accountable. And I would say it's something also very Methodist about it. It makes me think about the class leader system, where we gather to ask the question, how is it with your soul? And there is formation that happens there, but there's also this mutual accountability. So while it might not be new, it certainly is important that it be lifted up again in this new time and this new reality that we find ourselves. So yeah, thank you for that. And I would agree that that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Continuing to kind of think on Methodism, you quoted John Wesley a little earlier about the world being his parish, and certainly the AME Church as well as the CME Church, they are global churches.
Yes.
They are in the Caribbean and Africa and other Europe and other parts of the world. Your book is specifically entitled and perhaps focused on the African American church, but what might be some of the learnings or strategies that you talk about in this book that might be applicable to AMEs and CMEs and churches that are in other parts of the world outside of the US, even if they might have to take those principles or strategies and adapt them to their current and local context?
I think that actually, and of course, definitely the intentionality with African American church, because that's what I speak to primarily. But I think that it's fairly easy to take these principles. For instance, in one chapter that really I was moved to write about how testimony is part of Christian education. And I quote 2 or 3 occasions those enslaved Africans who were brought to America. And I quote them distinctly as their slaves' testimony from Blassingame's book, because their stories they are linked to God's story. And I believe that what you find in this book is that these stories, these things that I say, they're linked to God's story. And no matter where we are, what culture we come from, that I think we find that linkage taking place and those principles being there regardless of in every place, in every situation, there are issues and of justice and issues of the issue of love certainly is universal, and the issue of grace is universal. So all of those things apply no matter where we are. I think it's a good application for whether in Africa, the Caribbean, or wherever the case might be. I believe that it will speak to the souls of those people of the diaspora.
Thank you. I hear in your comments about testimony and story. I hear the voice of one of the late beloved bishops of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Dr. Thomas Hoyt,
Yes.
who talked about testimony as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
I also hear you've mentioned her already, Dr. Ann Wimberly and her story linking methodology. And I should say the AME Sunday School Union Publishing House, in partnership with the Department of Christian Education, when we looked at redesigning the adult curriculum for church school, we relied heavily on Dr. Wimberly's story linking methodology, and it helped us create the Liberating Faith Studies series, where we look at our story, the story of the stories of the Bible, as well as those cultural stories to lend or to help form a faith that is biblically rooted, but also with a liberation or a liberative lens. So I think you're spot on with that. It certainly is what we are trying to do. So we're running out of time. We could go on for quite some time. I would love to, but here's a after this kind of question. I'm going to give you a sentence, and I'd like you to complete the sentence and maybe say a little bit more about why you complete the sentence the way you do. So here's the sentence. After COVID-19, Christian education and faith formation will
be challenged, but at the same time will be, I'm confident, to be the lifeline of the church, and will find new and more effective ways to communicate and make disciples. And I say that because I don't think the pandemic will change the need for Christian education and formation, and that is what is keeping the church. That's what will keep the church moving forward. And I say in the book, and when you read the book, that I have used this formula about how formation plus nurture of God's people plus leadership leads to mission. And mission and service in the church is vital for us to know who we are and why we've been called. And I say that we must find more effective ways to communicate. It's interesting that we are finding newer and newer ways to communicate during this pandemic. And I think as we leave this pandemic, I think most people would agree, we will have found some ways that we may not have known or had used before, and we'll be more effective and have more opportunities to be more effective in our ways of communicating and making disciples. And I think that it will not be a case of either or, whether we use technology, the face-to-face, it will be a case of both and. We'll use both of them. And we will we'll be broader in our formation of people. We will see people as God's people, and we will see an opportunity to reach more and more people, no matter where those people live or may even be the hue of their skin. I think the opportunities will be immense.
Well, that's a wonderful word of encouragement and challenge to end this our very first broadcast on. And let me again thank you, Dr. Crutchfield, for agreeing to come on and share with us regarding your new book. And it will come out when?
October 5th will be released to bookstores.
October 5th, it will be released to bookstores, and we plan to carry it in the AME Christian Education Department's online bookstore. So look forward. We're encouraging everyone to purchase it and use it. I thank you again for joining us, Dr. Crutchfield. You continue to be a mentor and an encourager, and so we thank you for sharing with us. And allow me to just make a few announcements. Next week we will have one more Christian Ed talk, CED talk, and that one will be led by our own Vice Chair of the Commission on Christian Education, the Reverend Dr. Reginald Blunt, who was also Dr. Carmichael Crutchfield's professor and PhD advisor. He will be talking with us about ministry with young adults, the challenges and the possibilities. And we are excited that the interviewer will be Sister Martinique Mix, our connectional RAAC president, our young adult ministry. Also, to the members of the Fellowship of Church Educators, they will be hosting a virtual breakfast/brunch on the Zoom platform Saturday, September 26th, 11 a.m. Eastern. And for our friends in South Africa and other places, it may not be breakfast or brunch, but it can be a fellowship meal. So put on your FCE red and white and prepare your meal and get on the Zoom, and let's have a wonderful time in fellowship. We would normally have our annual prayer breakfast, but that we could not have due to COVID-19 pandemic, and we were not able to have our annual meeting. So this is an opportunity for us to fellowship. And those who have paid their dues, you probably have already received information regarding it. For those who may still be interested and have not received the information, if you can get more information by emailing fce@ameced.com. The department continues to produce resources during the pandemic. Resources such as devotionals and intergenerational activities, videos, music downloads, and also, given that September is Christian Education Month in the AME Church, you'll also find litanies and promotional and recruitment ideas. All of these resources are free and can be found at ameced.com/free-resources. So we encourage you to take advantage of these resources. And then finally, our AME Church Publishing House and Sunday School Union has created for us a platform for Connectional Church School. Every Sunday, we have teachers and participants from all over the connection. This coming Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern, the instructor will be the Reverend Dr. Joy Gallman of the 4th Episcopal District, pastor of St. Mark's AME Church in Milwaukee, and the immediate past chair of the Fellowship of Church Educators. So we encourage you to sign on and join in church school this coming Sunday. Let me again thank you, Dr. Crutchfield, for sharing with us. Let me also thank our chair of the Commission on Christian Education, Bishop David R. Daniels, our chief cheerleader, for all of his support of the work of the department. The Woods Digital Solutions, who have helped us get all of this together, and Ms. Carlene L. Douglas, our department office administrator, for all of her work, and certainly to Sister Kiara. I knew I was going to mess up her name. I'm sorry. Kiratiana Freeland, our webinar broadcast producer. We certainly could not have done any of this without any of you, and certainly to the viewers. We could talk, but if you didn't show up to listen, it would be in vain. So thank you so much for participating. We hope to see you next week, next Friday, same time, but next Friday. And let us extend to all of you again blessings during this 2020 Christian Education Month. And as we close with a PSA, a public service announcement from the Social Action Commission and the lay organization and other partners of the AME Church, with an AME v. voter mobilization video highlighting being with our senior bishop, A.J. Richardson, offering some words to us to encourage us and to encourage everyone who we know within the U.S. Who is eligible to vote, to mobilize and go out and exercise our citizenship as well as our discipleship. God bless you and take care.
Amen. I'm A.J. Richardson, Senior Bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It seems that in every election cycle, someone is sure to say how important the upcoming election is. The narrative goes something like this: this is the most critical election in a generation. Well, this time we really mean it. We can't stress strongly enough just how crucial this election is. Up and down the ballot, national, state, and local elections. Voting is not only our civic duty, it is also our duty of faith, with concerns for the environment, affordable health care, education, the economy, for our nation's place in the world, and the myriad other existential public policy issues that affect our lives, the lives of our families, and the next generation. By all means, vote.